You may have heard the phrase, history repeats itself, or those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Perhaps you've heard this one. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. These sayings suggest that there's a value of history in our culture and the belief that history can help us understand the present. And that belief shows up in data. A majority of U.S. adults across both major parties say it is extremely or very important to publicly discuss the country's historical successes and strengths. A majority also say that it's extremely or very important to publicly discuss the country's historical failures and flaws. That's according to a January 2026 survey from the Pew Research Center. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about history and our current political moment. This episode is the second from my live conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning historians Jon Meacham and Jill Lepore. But if you missed the first episode, don't worry. This discussion stands on its own. Our conversation was the final in the Connecticut Forum's 34th season. It included our live conversation and an opportunity for the panelists to meet local students. I sprinkled some of those student questions into our conversation. In the last episode, we heard the panelists debate the title and theme of the program, Lessons from History.
I feel so defeatist already because I'm not really a big believer in lessons from history.
The only data set we have in human affairs is history.
Jon shared some memorable stories.
It's a little like the story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools and said on the stump one day, if English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas.
And Jill spoke about competing myths in U.S. history. One myth is that all of U.S. history has been a force for good. And another myth is that U.S. history has been little more than a series of atrocities.
And those myths of American history map on, of course, perfectly to political extremism on the right and on the left.
Jon argued that we should see democracy as an undertaking to treat politics as an arena of contention, but not an all-out war.
That's what I think the predominant political power in the country, and I say predominant not because it's a majority, but because it has the means under their control. They want this to be a constant war.
Jill Lepore is the David Woods Kemper 41 Professor of American History at Harvard University and Professor of Law at Harvard Law School. She's also staff writer at The New Yorker and a best-selling author. Her books include These Truths, A History of the United States. A few days after our conversation, Jill's book, We the People, A History of the U.S. Constitution, won a Pulitzer Prize. Jon Meacham is a distinguished visiting professor at Vanderbilt University. His best-selling books include And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House.
We lack consensus on some of the most basic things that we once thought settled. Whether the earth is round, it is. Whether slavery was a major cause of the Civil War, it was. Whether Connecticut is really the pizza capital of the U.S. I'm not touching that one. Shout out to New Haven. But without consensus on some of the most basic ideas and most basic what many of us would think of as being fact, how does a nation actually hold together?
But can I throw that back to you, because you've been doing such important, innovative work around civics education. How do you see the work that you're doing as addressing that problem?
One of the things for me is helping young people understand what agency and power actually look like. I think so many of us have assumed that you have to have a title or a position or a particular standing in order to exert some agency, because we think at the national level without looking at community. And for me, that's where the power really lies. The power for all of us to be historians, to tell the stories of our families, even when they're uncomfortable, even when they differ from the narrative we were told growing up versus what we know. And that is the way, to me, that you hold community together that doesn't have to be perfect. If you ask people now about the 1960s, everyone marched with Martin Luther King, right? Everyone thought he was the greatest person in the world, when in reality, there were many communities saying, please don't come here, because you're going to make things difficult, and we have to live here once you have gone on to the next city. There's power in telling that truth, so that the narrative doesn't have to be, as you said, all or nothing, but finding that middle ground helps us stop thinking that perfection is the goal to build community.
That's essential. And it's actually a good thing, though, right, that people think that everybody marched. I mean, it means it was a good thing, right? It's like when President Kennedy was killed, that Gallup polled and 90% of the country had voted for him. That would surprise the people in Cook County. So I would argue that myth, history, there's a civic story that has to be told. I think Jill laid it out beautifully, that the competing narratives are red and blue. And the way to answer a nationalist narrative, and we are in a season of ethnic nationalism, right? Blood and soil. Orwell wrote at the end of the Second World War, nationalism is allegiance to your own kind, people who look like you. Patriotism is the answer to that. And patriotism is allegiance to a creed. Anyone who ascribes to a certain idea, who agrees to follow certain rules, can belong. And if you are not part of the authoritarian, predominant power in the country today, you cannot give up on the idea, the possibilities of America being great. You can't cede that. You cannot cede the flag and cede patriotism to the people who want to manipulate those symbols and make them symbols of exclusion and not of inclusion. And and maybe that's a political use of history, and if so, guilty. Right? I think the story that we have to tell, if you are pro-Constitution, is that politics, I'm repeating myself, but politics has to be an arena of contention where we win graciously, we lose graciously, we battle over what to do, we decide on something for a while, and then we do it all again. And it's not an occasion for total war. And that's, I think, a patriotic story.
Jill, let me personalize this with you, because I'm recalling the response you gave to the students. When we think about our civic stories and our opportunities to tell those civic stories, you talked about what it meant for you to be able to interview your grandmother and how that sparked a curiosity in the why, but then it also led you into other pathways. Share that aspect of your civic story, because I think it helps us break down this idea that it always has to be this grand sweeping thing. And it's really in the moment we think of as being mundane can set us on this course to be able to search for that common ground and that creed. What's that civic story for you?
Yeah, actually, it makes me think a little bit of a proposal that I believe it was the AHA, the American Historical Association, had written up that was going to be funded under the previous administration. All the funding was withdrawn for it, but I thought it was a great idea. They drew up a really nice lesson plan that was adapted for kind of every grade, K through 12, for the 250th, for kind of an activity to do this spring, right about now, with your students, which was to research, and really any grade could do this, what your community had done historically for the 4th of July. And plan a 4th of July celebration. I love this idea because, first of all, it's so local and it's so empowering, right? But you could go to the town library, to the neighborhood branch of your city library. You could find these records. You could see what these orations were. Maybe there's some videos online of something that's recent.
Newspapers.com.
You can read, you could read Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th, or What to the Black Man is the 4th of July. You can read, Daniel Webster's great 4th of July oration. There's 1,000 things that you can do to try to figure out what your town did. Maybe they put up monuments. Maybe they had bicycle races. It's a kind of just a great unit of saying, like, there were people here before I was even born, and they lived lives. They lived and died. They had joys. They had agonies. They had plans. And they built some things, and they tried to build some other things that they never built. They dismantled some things that I wish were still here. They did some horrible things. They did some great things, but now it's for us to come up with a plan. And that's the kind of historical work that I really cherish and that I know, like I've seen in my kids' public schools, that was really meaningful to me. I remember one day going into my kids' kindergarten classroom, and the teacher was explaining why all the chairs had been moved in this funny, weird configuration. And it was because they were going to China. The room had become an airplane. And she was introducing a new unit in which they had a map of the world, and every kid had put pins on the map for where all their grandparents were from. And they're from all over the world. And then they decided, they had these little votes on like what countries they wanted to visit over the course of the school year as kindergartners. They were going to go to Haiti, they were going to go to Somalia, they were going to go to China. And they made passports. And then each, 2-week unit, they would get on the plane and they would have airplane food. They would have these little trays. And then the next day they would arrive and they would have like nap time with their sleeping bags, and they'd wake up because they had an overnight flight if it was somewhere far away. And then
I want to go to school there.
And then the meals would be delivered. The parents of all the immigrant kids would bring in, the Haitian parents would bring in lunch that to the next day, and then they would come in and teach dance, and it was just a way to welcome all the many immigrant communities and everyone else, as the Irish kids of Cambridge too, because they did go to Ireland as well. And the whole year was this travel. And there's a way to do that as history too. This was a way to do it through space as opposed to through time, but to kind of cultivate an imagination, a sense that we all belong together in this classroom. We have so much to learn from one another as people. We have so much to learn about different ways that people eat and dress and dance and talk and sing. And the whole year was this explosion of knowledge. And you can do that same thing in a history classroom if you're teaching well, right? We're not going to travel to a slave auction. Like, there's a thing that cannot happen. But there is a capacity for moral imagination. Like, what did it mean to live the way this person lived? What did it mean to be the Confederate soldier that died on that battlefield? How's that different than being the Union soldier? How's that different from being the mother of 12 children who lost 7 of them while being held as property, but managed to escape? Like, what are these lives whose details we can uncover and learn from? That's what I loved about that July 4th experience. Like, we could just figure out what did these people do who went to this same school that we went to? I forget what question I'm even attempting to answer, but I think
go with it.
I think that there's just a way to think about history as curiosity, as inquiry, as empathy, as among the many gains that has, in a curricular sense, again, much in common with art or literature, right? Or studying music. Like, it's really about kind of the human condition and the incredible number of different ways that humans have lived, are living, and one day can live.
So let's talk about curiosity. because the audience is quite curious about the two of you and what you think. So I'm going to throw out some pretty rapid fire questions. Again, the students are tough, but we want to get the other audience questions in as well. So if you could give me a quick response to this, if you could travel back in time to witness one particular event in American history, what would it be?
American history?
American history.
Usually I answer the Last Supper, but that's not American. If English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas. I think I would want to hear the Gettysburg Address.
Great. Jill, what about you? What moment?
You know, there are unsolved mysteries that I would like to know the answer to. I would like to be in a room with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg and ask them a few questions.
It's important. What do you see as the biggest threat to United States democracy?
All right, I'll just go ahead and do it. He's in the White House.
Why are pundits and historians ignoring the real culprit behind Trumpism, the people who voted for him, rather than a single person?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I blame them too. No, look, I get it in 16, I didn't get it in 20, and I sure as hell didn't get it in 24, right? And I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. I voted for candidates of both parties, although the margin is growing. You know, 35% of the country is always kind of crazy. That's the number of folks who still approved of Joe McCarthy a year after he fell from power. Washington Post poll, 1955. The people I do blame, that's a harsh word, the people I would like to talk to, that's nicer, right, is the 14.9%. And I call them the Peter Millar Republicans. If there are any golfers here, you would know that. So these are driving range people, Republicans who, for whatever reason, a very partisan brain that I don't have, could not see their way to voting for President Biden or Vice President Harris because whatever you think about President Biden and Vice President Harris, they were not going to undo the Constitution. And yet they, for whatever reason, they just couldn't do it. I think that was a nationalistic vote and not a patriotic one.
Coming up, more with Pulitzer Prize-winning historians Jill Lepore and Jon Meacham. Jon tells a story that involves 3 different U.S. presidents.
And the phone rings, and it was George Herbert Walker Bush. And he said, "How you doing?"
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning historians about what history can and cannot tell us about the current political moment. We're still joined by Harvard professor and best-selling author Jill Lepore. We're also still joined by best-selling author and visiting professor at Vanderbilt University, Jon Meacham. I spoke with these 2 historians at the start of May for a live conversation for the Connecticut Forum. Before the break, we were in the middle of some rapid-fire questions submitted by the audience. Jon had just answered this question from the audience. Why are pundits and historians ignoring the real culprit behind Trumpism, the people who voted for him rather than a single person? Here's Jill's answer to that same question.
So I just want to say here, because I feel like this is an important thing to say, that I don't think any voters for any candidate are culprits. I don't think the word was used with a great deliberation, but I think it's important for me to say I don't blame people who voted for anybody. I think there are larger structural forces in American life that got us to the choices that we had. I don't think we have had good presidential candidates for quite some time in this country. And the structural forces that lead us to have quite limited candidates are much greater concern to me than the results of recent elections.
Can I ask, not good candidates, based on what standard? I mean, what candidates were good that we've fallen from?
What candidates were good?
That we have fallen from. I mean, you just said we haven't got good candidates in a while. I'm just curious.
I think that the progressives of the Democratic Party since the era of Clinton-Gore have, on the whole, failed to deliver the kinds of progressive reforms that were promised. It has driven voters from the Democratic Party whose interests are, in fact, best represented by the Democratic Party. And I think that's a big part of how Trump came to power in the first place.
Let me ask you another.
This is clearly an very unpopular opinion with this crowd.
It got really quiet. So since we're being provocative, let me ask you another question. This one is from Nicole. For you, Jill, do you think we will see a female president in the U.S. in the next 20 years?
This question has been asked as a Gallup opinion poll question, I think, since 1936. And in 1940, there was a cover of Wonder Woman in which Wonder Woman was President of the United States, and she's in her star-spangled outfit. But the caption underneath, the bunting on the stage says, 1,000 years in the future.
Wait that long. John, who do you think was the funniest president?
The funniest president?
Funniest.
Advertently or inadvertently?
Well, we'll let you decide. So
I've only read about him, obviously. I will say President Kennedy seems to have had a kind of ironic wit that I would have liked. Can I tell you one story?
Of course.
Okay. So this is a story about three of my favorite topics. George Herbert Walker Bush, son of Connecticut, Donald Trump, first time, and Andrew Jackson. I know it sounds like, and there's a one parachute and they came into a bar. I know that. But bear with me for a second. So in March of 2017, President Trump announced that he was coming down to Nashville, where I live, to lay a wreath at the grave of Andrew Jackson at the Hermitage. And presidents always see as they wish to be seen. And Steve Bannon had talked Trump into that he was a Jacksonian guy. And so he was coming down. And I was sitting at home and I thought, well, I should do something, right? I'm a Jackson biographer. So I wrote an open letter to the president saying, Dear Mr. President, welcome, delighted you're embracing history, but if you're going to embrace Andrew Jackson, don't just embrace the crazy parts, right? And there are plenty of crazy parts of Jackson to embrace. He once said that his only two regrets in public life were that he had not shot the Speaker of the House and hung his own vice president.
So making him a candidate for the funniest.
There you go. There you go. So I send this off to the local newspaper, and in kind of a brave moment, with which I had nothing to do, it was the entire front page of the local nuppaper was my letter, and to make sure he looked at it, they set the type in his profile. So, had no effect whatever, of course, on President Trump. The next day, I'm walking into lunch, true story, and the phone rings, and it was George Herbert Walker Bush. And he said, how you doing? And I said,
you're pretty good at this.
Dana Carvey once said the key to doing the old man's voice was Mr. Rogers trying to be John Wayne. And he spent a lot of time in the hospital that winter, and so his staff was printing out stuff for him to read. They'd given him this letter, so he called up. I said, I'm fine, Mr. President. How are you? He said, I'm fine. He said, I read your letter to Jackson, and I thought, oh, the old boy's losing it, right? He thinks I'm writing letters to dead people. And without missing a beat, George H.W. Bush said, yeah, but I said, well, Mr. President, that was a letter to Trump about Jackson. And the old man said, yeah, but Jackson will pay more attention. And then he hung up. He thought of the joke, and he hung up. So he was pretty funny.
I think that's pretty great. Last quick round question. I don't know that this is actually a quick question, but we will have to approach it that way. The midterms, are they coming fast enough?
I think on the space-time continuum, I don't think we can do anything about that. Look, it's a fascinating moment because if you think you can predict what's going to happen, we don't even have the maps, right? I mean, it's going. You're a map expert. It's just going all the time. And can I maybe enlist you in something? See if you agree with this. If you take nothing away, I'm a big believer that we should call it gerrymandering, because it was named after Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts. No one cares about this. I'm very upset about it. President Obama, has made a big issue of this. I brought this up to him once. He said, I think we've got bigger problems. But will you join me?
Let's just end it instead.
Okay, we can end it, but you got to know what it is.
There is a question that asks of the two of you, should we reflect on history to change the way we vote in this country? I know that's a really big question. It's like an entire semester's worth. But is this a moment to reflect on history and think about what we could do differently when it comes to access to voting and representation in the U.S.?
So I actually think it's useful to think about how change happens in a very structural way. And if you look across the last few centuries, the era of modernity, our model for how we understand change is really different. And I think that can help, especially young people, understand that you have to come up with your own theory of change. So, in the Christian West, the story of any life or the fate of any person or movement was a journey from sin to salvation, right? That is the story of change. The great innovation of the Enlightenment is to see the story of a life or the story of a people as a journey of moral progress, which is not the same, but it is an attempt to mend your own ways, right? That a people as well as a person can mend their ways and become better and do better in the world. In the 19th century, we had, of course, the idea of evolution, right? That species evolve. In the 20th century, we had really the emphasis, certainly in the United States, was on the idea of economic growth, right? The meaningful kind of change is economic growth. We can measure it. The GNP, because social sciences become prevalent, and this is how we understand change. In the 21st century, the theory of change that has had most purchase is disruptive innovation. This idea that you need to destroy something and create something that will be better by never looking backward, never appreciating what it is that you have. And I think if we think about those different stories of change, salvation, moral progress, evolution, growth, disruption, it's not surprising that there's a kind of freneticism and a franticness. Like we live in it, people like change is disruption. Like, oh, it's the new, now we have TikTok this version, or, now it's Claude Code, and now it's Claude Mythos, and now who knows what the next Claude is going to be. That franticness in which a theory of change that is driven by technology and by a politics that is libertarian and so has no concern for rules, that's what disruption is. It's a political idea that has taken hold. It's like take Ayn Rand and attach Joseph Schumpeter and then attach Clayton Christensen and then attach Elon Musk. And you have this let's just it up. That's what disruption is. And so a reason to study history, for instance, would be to historicize even your understanding of how change happens. It's useful to think, wow, actually I could think of change as moral progress. Maybe things can get better. Think of the moral crusades across American history, the abolitionist movement, the suffrage movement, the temperance movement. The pro-life movement is a moral crusade, right? We live in a country that has been largely shaped by moral crusades. Those are worth thinking about. What did those people think they were fighting for? How did they fight? How did they struggle? What were the tools that they used? How did they imagine change happens? I think that's something that we can really gain, but does that shape how we vote? That's not how I think about what voting is. I have plenty of theories about voting and ideas about voting, but they don't map onto how I think about that. I do think it's useful, though. I think it's very disorienting for young people to be asked to just accept that disruption has how change happens, because it's quite violent. And one of the reasons I wrote this book about the history of the Constitution is to resurrect what I call the philosophy of amendment, and to argue that the United States invented the written Constitution in the 1770s with the first state constitutions, Virginia in 1776, Maryland, New Hampshire, my state's Constitution, New Hampshire, Massachusetts was 1780, Vermont, 1777. And these written constitutions had these mechanisms for amendment. And the word amendment really does, it is a mechanism of peaceful revolution. Amend has, 4 of the 5 of its letters are the same as the word mend. It has the same root as mend. You can mend your ways. You can make amends. That amendment as an idea, as a mode of change, is the idea on which the nation was founded. You said it earlier, John, that amendment, improving things, repairing things, correcting your errors, making something better, adapting for the future. All those ideas about change are embodied in this kind of beautiful word amendment that is in our Constitution. Like, that is our right as a people to alter or amend or abolish our government. That's the idea of the Declaration of Independence and of the Constitution. And it's a really beautiful idea and means of change. And I talk to students all the time about what would it mean. We can't amend the Constitution right now because Congress is too polarized and the people are too polarized. But it's important to ask yourself, if you could amend your state constitution, you probably can. But if you wanted to think about amending the federal constitution, what would you want to do? What would be the thing you would want to do? Would you want to limit executive powers? Would you want to abolish executive orders? Would you want to have term limits for members of Congress? Would you want to have age limits for the Supreme Court? What is it that you would want? What is it? How could you mend this country? And for me, that work of just thinking, it is a little woo-woo spiritual for me, but I really believe in the idea of repair.
I think we need a little more woo-woo spiritual right now. Yeah. It's good. John, that to me is the power and the beauty of history. The idea that it can provide...
Even, you might call it a lesson.
Fair point.
The idea that history can guide us.
We're supposed to admit when we've lost. I've lost.
Graciously. Thank you for that. I'm thinking of where we are now with access to technology and social media. We have access to more information at our fingertips than we could imagine. Yeah. And yet, it doesn't always get used in those ways. What do you see as either the benefit or the challenge of technology in this moment when we think about the things that Jill mentioned of envisioning?
So, absolutely. So, one of the most important books I think that not enough people know about is a book by a student of Marshall McLuhan's named Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Anybody know that? Published in the mid-'80s, I think, wasn't it? It doesn't get to the internet, but he runs through different kinds of minds that we had. The typographic mind was when we just read everything. The Lincoln-Douglas debates were read. Lincoln took care to have them published. That moved to the telegraphic mind. Once we had the capacity to send news every day, instead of waiting for news that was worth sending every day, we just sent news. And so you would have to find something. And it elevated the trivial because it came at you at the same level as a declaration of war and the birth of one of Queen Victoria's grandchildren, right? Didn't matter, right? It all came at you. And we began to move away from the capacity to spend more time reading and grappling, and it gets to the radio, that raises the emotionalism, television obviously raises that, and now we're where we are. I play a game sometimes, because again, I'm a lot of fun to hang out with, called Who's the Most Important American Who Was Not President? I would argue of the last X number of years, the most important person is Steve Jobs. Can you think of anyone else who has affected how more people spend more time? Everyone in this room, I suspect, has a phone in their pocket that they have looked at today far more than they would want to admit. And 2007, when you look at all the indicators of polarization, it starts going up. One of the moments I became really worried about the future of the republic was when I had a very senior United States senator pull his phone out of his pocket and say, "This is the problem." This is like 2011. And he had all his Twitter mentions that were coming in and his Google mentions. And I realized, okay, we're all affected by how people feel about us. We're all affected by mail we get. The intimacy of attacks that reach you on your phone, which is something that is now with you all the time, makes the people who are there, who are out there reaching out to people, reacting to people, it elevates their importance. I'm off all of it. I got off social media when Musk bought Twitter. I am much mentally healthier. But our friend Al Gore has a great line. He said, social media, even if you're not on it, is like secondhand smoke. Mm-hmm. So I worry about it all the time. But here's the thing. We are choosing to be this divided. Right? We don't have to be. People say, oh, why can't we have Walter Cronkite again? Well, just watch the news every half hour. I mean, you can create a world that is saner and less hyperbolic if you choose to. Part of the problem in the moment, and it's Richard Hofstadter has, I think, two great essays. One, the more famous one, is The Paranoid Style in American Politics. 9 years before, he wrote a piece called The Pseudo-Conservative. And he talked about how status politics was replacing interest politics in the 50s. It's self-evident, right? If you're fighting about your tax rate or your economic system, that's one thing. Lends itself to data, lends itself to reason. If you're fighting about your status in life, it's emotional, it's manipulatable. I'm not sure that's a word, but I like it. It enables it gives room for the politics of fear. And I worry that what the phone has done is put us all in a perpetually vulnerable spot. We've lost a kind of sovereignty, but we can get it back.
Coming up, more with Pulitzer Prize-winning historians Jill Lepore and Jon Meacham. Jill talks about Benjamin Franklin's sister, Jane, and shares some of Jane's moving words.
In our family, there were 17 of us, and only one of us acquired an education and a reputation.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with Pulitzer Prize-winning historians about lessons from the past and history's role in shaping our future. We're still joined by Harvard professor Jill Lepore, author of We the People, A History of the U.S. Constitution, and Jon Meacham, visiting professor at Vanderbilt University and author of American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House. Here's more of our conversation. And a note for our listeners, this segment contains references to sexual assault.
I want to bring this quote in from James Baldwin. Baldwin says, "I have never been in despair about the world. I've been enraged by it. I don't think I'm in despair. I can't afford despair. I can't tell my nephew or my niece, you can't tell the children there's no hope." So my question for both of you, given your roles as historians, as journalists, as people who are in conversation with amazing people at the Connecticut Forum on a Friday night, what then is the role of hope? Again, not just as a feeling, but as a discipline in these moments. It's the role of hope.
I actually more frequently talk about determination. I sometimes think hope in our public discourse has become cheapened, which is really unfortunate because I think it is important. it's crucial to have a sense of your own capacity to seek out the community of others toward a common goal. And I think in a technological environment that pushes you towards isolation, that's one of the features of isolation, and social alienation is one of the tragedies of the social media era, that I think the determination to create and sustain community is what I think is really vital.
That's good. I think despair is a sin because I have the privilege to be tired and to withdraw, but I'm a boringly heterosexual white Southern male Episcopalian, right? Things tend to work out for me in this country. The point is it's supposed to work out for everyone. And if I can't live in hope that that can happen, then I'm becoming part of what I oppose so strongly, which is the triumph of appetite and ambition over the application of the Declaration.
So is there an historical figure, whether it's a public figure or one from your own personal lives, who embodied that sense of determination?
Yes. I once wrote a book about Benjamin Franklin's sister Jane. Benjamin Franklin is, in fact, the most important American who never was president.
Of the last 20 years?
No, not of the last 20 years. There were 17 Franklin children. He was the youngest of 10 boys. She was the youngest of 10 girls. He ran away when he was 17, leaving her behind. They were essentially twins in personality and talent, Benny and Jenny, they were called. She seems to have been raped at age 15 and was forced to marry the rapist, which was common to legitimize the child, who she then miscarried. She had 12 children. She buried 11 of them, raised her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because her daughters all died and granddaughters died in childbirth, and was utterly transformed by the spirit of the American Revolution. Franklin sent her books all the time. She learned to read because he taught her to read. Most women did not know how to read, and he taught her also to write. And one of the most beautiful letters I have ever read is a letter that she wrote to him in 1786. She had been reading a book by the British radical Richard Price, and she quotes it at length. And she says, Price says that it takes 100,000 spider eggs to make one spider, and 500,000 acorns to make one elm tree. In our family, there were 17 of us, and only one of us acquired an education and a reputation. And it is my hope that that is over now, that this revolution will bring a world where we can all have the chance to grow into an elm tree. Mm-hmm. It is this woman who has suffered from birth, and who has seen her brother rise to everything and has nothing but love for him. And there's something about the distinctiveness of the American dream. She becomes a political philosopher of the American experiment. Mm-hmm. She has nothing. She never does have anything. And yet she has lived a life of unrelenting determination and care and love for those around her. Mm.
It's beautiful.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. For me, it's John Robert Lewis, born in Troy, Alabama, February of 1940. He died in July of 2020. The last time he was on the Pettus Bridge, which was right before COVID descended, we were all touching elbows. Remember that brief phase? He said he had pancreatic cancer, and so he'd gone back to his kind of collegiate weight. So he looked the way he looked on March 7th, 1965. And we were privileged to be on the bridge, 1,000 people that morning in 2020, March of 2020. And he said, some years ago, some children of God walked across this bridge to shed a little blood to try to redeem the soul of America. And as I listened to him, you've all been to the Pettus Bridge? Who's been there? Go there. Everyone has to go there, because it's most historical sites you go to seem smaller than in your imagination. This seemed bigger to me. It was taller, over the river. It was scary up there. And I thought, if this is the message, this is the determination. He was arrested 41 times. He had every expectation that he would have been killed in the South. He was in more danger when we couldn't see him than when we could, because of being in custody. I thought, I want to write it. I'd always thought I would write about him someday. And because of the cancer, he actually enjoyed doing Zooms as he was dying. And so we did a series of interviews. And I asked him, sort of a biographer's trick, what do you dream about? And I'll be honest with you, I thought he was going to say being beaten, my face on the asphalt, being in Parchman, the Mississippi prison that William Faulkner called Destination Doom. John Lewis said, I dream about the sunlight. I dream about the singing. When we were marching, we would sing. And I remember the shuffling of our feet. And I think we kept going then, and we have to keep going now.
As we wrap our time together, I want us to remember that history, like sunlight, is something that we carry with us. It's not fixed. And so my challenge to you as the audience is to pay attention, to ask harder questions, to seek out stories that challenge you and unsettle you, and remember that what we choose to see and what we choose to do together will become part of the history that others will inherit. Please join me in thanking our guests, Jill Lepore and Jon Meacham.
Jill Lepore is professor of American history at Harvard University. She's a staff writer at The New Yorker and best-selling author. Her book, We the People, A History of the U.S. Constitution, just earned a Pulitzer Prize. Jon Meacham is Distinguished Visiting Professor at Vanderbilt University. His best-selling books include And There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House. Our conversation was recorded as part of a live event for the Connecticut Forum. Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon Aiken, and Erica McIntosh. Meg Fitzgerald is our Senior Manager of Projects and Radio Programming. Special thanks to the team at the Connecticut Forum. And a note, the Connecticut Forum is a current sponsor of Connecticut Public. You can listen to more than 250 episodes of Disrupted in our archive. It includes the first part of our conversation. And you can find us wherever you get your podcast. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown Dean. Thanks for listening.